Are you willing to accept Christ's invitation to know Him more intimately, love Him more intensely, and follow Him more closely, and then go out into the world and live His good news? If you say yes, then you could be the 13th apostle. Join Dan Duddy and Tom Caffrey, the odd couple of Catholic radio, as they ride the radio waves 2 by 2 to share the goodness, beauty, and truth of Jesus Christ and His church. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the 13th apostle.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is part 3. It's the 13th apostle. We explored the good, the beautiful, and the true of the Catholic faith and the Catholic Church, and so often the challenging. Otherwise, there wouldn't be thousands of books written on this. There are some in my world, my circle, who believe only 2 books are needed. But we know that there are thousands of books on topics such as what we're wrestling with, which is, well, as Jim ended the last episode on the subject of predestination in the context of free will. So if you're predestination, somebody's got to go through some hoops and ladders and more to say how can you have predestination and free will? If you're a Calvinist, that you've been elected, what does that mean? What is being the elect? If you're the elect, then no matter what you do, you're over the goal line. You've arrived. So I don't see how anybody can believe. When I first learned about it, I couldn't shake my head. I don't know how anybody could be a Calvinist. From that standpoint, I'm not saying everything that Calvin wrote was bad, not at all. He was a brilliant mind. But if you think that you're the elect, well, we could say like the Israelites. And, the Calvinists have a point. They have a leg to stand on if they refer to God's relationship with the Israelites. How many times did the Israelites break the covenant? But they were the chosen people. So they were the first elect. But it would seem to me that if you're the elect, if you believe in predestination, well, whatever you do, okay, if you go to the doorknob with your right hand and then at the last second you switch and think, did I fool God? Was his will for me to use my right hand to open that doorknob, and I just shot the left hand out? It's all these things. I think I'm going to turn right, I'm going to turn left. So I think the easiest thing to deal with, for my understanding, is that for me the easiest thing to deal with is to not believe in predestination. I may be wrong, and find out. I don't know whether you guys are. I don't know whether we'll all find out how each of us said, where have we gone? I think we're going to all remain on Earth. We're going to be new creations, and heaven and earth will combine, which is the whole point of the tabernacle. So, I don't believe we're going up to heaven or down to hell. I don't think that we don't need a compass. So Deacon Chuck is getting the digitalis out. He needs that medication.
Well, he's digging for
failing apart.
Well, he's digging for his pills. Let me just ask you one question, and then I'll shut up, because it's back to what I would see as an example of predestination. And I'd say you guys out the appointment in Samara by Somerset Maugham, where the servant's in the marketplace in Baghdad and sees death. Death, he thinks, sends him a gesture of anger, and the servant goes back to the master and says, lend me your horse, I'm going to go to Samara, and I'll escape death. Death won't find me. And master goes to the marketplace and confronts Death, and Death says that wasn't anger or threat. That was surprise, because I was surprised to see him at the market here in Baghdad when I have an appointment with him tonight in Samara. Now, is that predestination or is that free will? Did the servant have the free will to make that decision inside that framework, that canvas of, say, a predestined ending to his life, that he's going to end up at that point, rather than staying where he was? And I know sometimes I sound like I'm doing the devil's advocate, where I'm just being contrary to be contrary, but I'm not. This is how my mind works, and I'm thinking about that. Was it predestined for him to die that night, or did he have the free will to make that decision to stay or to go? And this is before Calvin. This is an ancient Mesopotamian legend.
Well, if we believe that God is the creator of the universe, he created the Mesopotamians, right, Deacon Chuck?
Yeah, and it's like it's also, you mentioned Judas Iscariot, I think multiple times in your show. He knew, God knew that he would betray him. It's in Scripture. It's multiple times. It says, in fact, that's almost part of his business card. Judas Iscariot, who would betray him, right? It's predestination to me. It falls it's in the domain of God, right? Certainly not in the domain of Deacon Chuck. God knows. I don't.
And he knew that
I
Peter
don't.
would betray him.
Right. Did both have the opportunity to return after their own individual fall? Sure, certainly. Did they both?
Jesus said, I didn't lose one of them. When he's talking to his father, he said, I didn't lose one of them.
Of those who, well, that's not a period there. That's a comma at the end of that statement, right? You got to finish the sentence.
Go ahead.
I did not lose any of those whom he gave him, right?
Did he give him Judas? Okay. That's episode 8.
Yeah.
All right. So
that's my understanding, is that it's really all about directionality. We're supposed to continue always toward God, even after, in the midst of our sinfulness and our brokenness, and we continue to strive to make good choices and to maintain our baptismal purity as much as we possibly can. And again, we go back to confession when we failed. But it's about a directionality. It's in what direction are we heading? And it is either heaven or hell. It's not Philadelphia or New Jersey or wherever you think we're going to end up.
and I'm saying that, yeah, I believe in heaven and I believe in hell. My point was that we're just not. We're not going there. We're not going into that rocket ship up into the northern to the North Star, where we're going to the southern latitudes for hell. I mean, all you got to do is look at the end of Revelation.
You do believe heaven is a physical place, right? I mean, because God has a body, right? Jesus has a body. He has a human.
I believe
human,
that
that's a Blessed Mother who's there.
That heaven is a reality.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Thanks.
I know you want a physical address. You're not going to get that out of me. Okay. There's no PO box, nothing like that. Can't take GPS and say, Google Maps, punch it in there. So we talk about free will again, freedom, divine providence. What is it? Everything is ordered, right, Dan? God orders everything in the universe according to what the Catechism says, according to what Deacon Chuck says. So remember what we were talking about last night. Some of it got personal with Jim, but then we were also pulling it back to the abstract, or to compare it with others who've made hard choices. And could we say that people and this is what we talked about, with Jim, and anybody in the military, anybody in combat, but certainly in the military, or any environment, in school, you have your rules, you have that canvas. So you have some liberties to do things, but you don't have total freedom if you're going to operate in that area. So if you don't have total freedom, except for if we're talking about something in military combat, like that My Lai massacre in Vietnam, whether it's the guy who kills the enemy with his bare hands, who launches a missile from a ship, I don't know, Jim, 100 miles away, 500 miles away, wherever, okay?
Could be 1,000 miles away.
Okay. Or let's loose a missile from a drone. Deacon Chuck, you kind of, in your insouciance, you just kind of casually blew it off and just say, well, no, there's nothing cerebral about it. You got to go in the heart into the confessional. The questions, we're supposed to have a formed conscience now. We're supposed to have what's the terminology we use as we're getting ready for confession? Examination of conscience.
Yeah, examination. Yeah.
And we have to be confident that
it's also the firm amendment to not sin again, right?
Well, that's
Recognization,
if you're
yeah.
determined that it's sin. And this was
Yeah,
part of what the hang up last night.
sure.
If you're in the military and you're given orders to do this, fire the missile, you take out 100 people that you missed the target, you take out 100 innocent people. You didn't intend to do that. And you actually, maybe you found out a year later or 6 hours later, whatever it is. But in every different environment, people are being killed. Are those, and I mentioned last night the just war theory. So, and these were heavy discussions going on in clergy, theologians, in government bodies to say, okay, how do we help these combatants to process this, and how do we help ourselves? Because we're giving the order to push the button, we're giving the order to fire that missile or that gun or whatever, or take out that whatever.
Yeah, sure. That's where a
So
good that's
that's
where a
the
good priest
wrestling
that's
match
where a
with
good
the
priest is.
sin.
Yeah, that's where a
What's
good
the
priest is going to
sin?
help. That the sin of man is not defined by the government, by the way. So you can't you can't stay there, right? I mean, that's where you have a good confessor. The sins of man are resolved in the confessional, and that's where those need to be brought for the the identification. And it's not just sometimes you go through an examination of conscience and there's some confusion there. You can bring that too, right? There's nothing wrong with that, and to be able to speak that plainly as best as we can. And that's where we get the good guidance from the priest, who is, by the way, in persona Christi Capitas. We know that they're in the person of Christ. Christ is in the confessional waiting to help the priest, help the penitent, to ease them of the burdens of sin.
The question is whether they're penitent about this or that.
Well, yeah, sometimes
Yeah,
that
I
takes
stole this.
works. Yeah,
Right. So you're getting that's the pastoral care of the priest in
sure,
addition to the formula of actually
absolution,
hearing,
right? Yeah,
right? I
yes.
mean, doing the sacrament, the rubrics of the sacrament,
Mhm.
and then the pastoral work. So like when Dan says, I had a good confession, and he's talking about when he knows he got the sacrament, but he got that pastoral care. I wonder whether Dan would ever say he had a good confession or whether Kevin would say he had a bad confession because the priest had a bad attitude or the priest wasn't very pastoral. But both of them got the absolution. I mean, they went in there right-minded. All the steps were followed. But the priest was a jerk, let's say. As you said, we're bodies and we're souls, we're spirits. Many people still feel guilty after confession, even though they are no longer objectively guilty. They have no more guilt of the sin because the sacrament has removed that,
Right. Yeah,
but they feel
I had
guilty.
a priest friend of mine that after he was ordained, his spiritual director walked up to him and said, "Do you feel ordained?" And he said no. It's not about a feeling, right? We do trust the sacraments
We are
to be
feeling
right.
beings.
Yeah,
We're
but it's
feeling
not.
creatures.
But feelings are not fact, Tom. No, they're not
And I told you to
infallible.
tell
Yeah.
Diane next time she's sobbing about something, say, no, that's not a fact.
Yeah, feelings are not infallible. Yeah.
Uh,
Already established, episode 1.
do you think that God has, like Kevin, do you think that God has an overarching will, a plan, not will, a plan, and that he expects each one of us to follow? A specific map.
Well, I imagine that because God is the creator of the universe and he's also omniscient, that he knew how each one of us was going to act prior to the creation. So I don't know if there's any hoping or expectation of us acting in a particular way on his behalf because he already knew that since before time, which also makes me think, well, that means that God knew at the point of creation, if that even makes sense, um, given that he's outside of time. But at the point of creation, from our understanding, and he knew that I was going to sin the way that I do, or he knew that Judas was going to betray Christ, yet he still set the plan, still set the ball in motion, so to speak, for the entire creation of the universe for one of his creatures, at least Judas Iscariot, to be eternally separated from him. I think that's a difficult
Okay,
to,
I object, but that's okay. Um, I object to the eternal separation, but I can see why you would say that, and why everybody on this panel would probably say that.
well, we don't know, but presumably if he did not confess prior to his death,
Yep, we don't know. That's like,
we don't
I
know.
think that's a good asterisk.
But then
Uh,
that would mean that we don't know about anyone. And if we don't know about anyone, but does that mean that we can make a judgment, a conclusion that there is such thing as hell? And I think that's already been established that there is. So there must be at least some people there, presumably.
is there no there, and it's just that separate it's like you cease to exist. But if you think that the one thing you asked the question,
But
go
it doesn't
ahead.
even matter. It doesn't, the point I'm making is that it doesn't even matter. The point I'm making is that when God created the universe, whether the hell is a separation or a ceasing to exist or not being part of the um, beatific vision, God presumably knew that at the point of creation. So the question is, why would he create a scenario in which he knew these things were going to unfold the way that they did and do and have?
I remember you asking that exact question about 3 years ago. I was working on it, and the only thing that made sense to me was he knew that we didn't know. And for us to see how each one of us was going to unfold. If he knows exactly what I'm about to say in 2 seconds, okay, but he doesn't know how Deacon Chuck is going to, react to what I say,
Oh,
or
yes, he does.
Sure, he does.
no, no, I'm sorry, that Deacon Chuck doesn't know. So, but then Deacon Chuck has this reaction. So I think the perspective is our perspective, not God's.
Yeah, Kevin raises a good point. It's all-knowing, all omnipotent, all-powerful, and omnipresent. He's everywhere. You can't say he's some knowing or has some power or everywhere except this place, because otherwise he ceases being God, right? So of course he knows all those things. So Kevin's good point, right?
No, but Kevin was asking what's the purpose of, if I understood you correctly, Kevin, what's the purpose if he already knows everything that's going to happen and he's outside of time? I mean, nothing's a surprise to him. I mean, why does he just go to sleep? But he knows that we don't know what we're going to do.
But why would he even create a creation for the purpose of observing his creatures being perpetually surprised by their depravity? I mean,
So that I think you're on Jim's team in that, you know, what's
Oh, I thought
this
you were going somewhere else with that.
omniscience, omnipotent? If he's all powerful, tell me, Deacon Chuck, tell me how that evangelizes. This guy is all powerful,
Oh, it
and yet
does.
look at
It
all the
does.
horrors
Yeah.
in the
The fact
world.
that we're unnecessary, but he created us anyway. That
No,
he
we were
did it out of he
necessary.
does it out of love. He does
Yeah,
it out of love,
exactly.
of
That's
course.
why we were necessary for him to have this loving
No, no, no.
relationship with us.
Wait a minute. No, we're not necessary. We're not necessary beings.
Well, I
God doesn't.
disagree.
God, you're saying God needs something? He needs nothing.
He wants to love.
He is love.
Sure.
He wanted us,
Yeah,
he
of
willed
course
us
he
into
is.
creation.
Yeah, but it doesn't. Yeah, it's not
Okay,
dependent on
so
us.
so let's get to that evangelizing moment when all the babies are being slaughtered and God's omnipotent. We'll just say all the innocents are being slaughtered and God's omnipotent. I mean, this is classic, the theodicy. How can a good God allow suffering to the innocent? An all-powerful God So how do we reconcile that in the last 3 or 4 minutes that we have left? How do you answer that this God is all powerful? He can do it all. He created the universe, the cosmos, everything. But yet this little child is wasting away. This one's had a bomb dropped close enough to take off all its limbs, but it's
Yeah,
still alive.
and you're right. It would mean nothing if Z was the end, as Jim indicated. A to Z. No, it's beyond Z. It's beyond. It's heaven.
So if
That's the
if the people
intention.
who are suffering, if the parents who see the little baby have their limbs blown off, uh, tell us how we reconcile that to get those people into the church and to believing in this God that could have stopped that but didn't.
Sure, sure. Yeah, and that those are always mysteries. That suffering is always going to be a mystery for us, and we always have the ability to turn to God, particularly in those moments when a lot of pastors, I think, would agree that it's in those times when suffering shows up on our doorstep that people turn and ask those good questions. Who is God? Being able to ask those questions and to have some good answers for them, or at least introduce them to God who loves them, even in the midst of their suffering, and introduce them to Christ, who shows them that suffering is not without meaning.
Kevin, were you gonna say something?
Well, I was saying, I think my question precedes all these considerations, because at the point of creation, he knew that we were going to fall and be in need of a church and the sacrifice of his son, all of these things. So, and that there would be people who would not follow in Christ's path, separate themselves from God in this life and then the next. But again, like, why create this given the knowledge that this would be all these things, all these considerations about evangelization and thinking about suffering, us wrestling with these thoughts. Every consideration that we're having right now was already known by God at the point of creation. So,
Perhaps.
well,
We can believe that, we just don't know it.
No, of course he knew it,
Well,
but
I
we
know
don't have the answer why.
you
Yeah,
have meetings on Mondays with God,
yeah,
and
we don't know. Yeah, we don't know why, but I'm glad he did.
Dan, we know by faith, right? Do we
and
know by objective fact, or we know by faith? And you read your catechism and you answered those questions when you were in what, sixth grade? Oh, we're just about out of time. So in sixth grade.
Yeah, so I just come from a different mold of thinking. Uh, I actually find some of what's being said, this is me speaking, dangerous for me to swirl around in my head. I'm finding myself coming more and more from a kind of a free will discipline in my desire to get to heaven, my love for God. And I'm finding a great deal of inspiration in knowing that I'm made in his likeness, therefore he's in mine. And we could talk about his omnipotence, which is absolutely beyond, my imagination. And we know that he ordered the world. And as C.S. Lewis says, God takes thought for it all, from atoms to angels. Everything is providential. But he's present in his rational creatures like me and you in an entirely different way. And once again, the answer is in the Triduum. It's why we had Christ. What greater example or expose of true humanity is there other than the Last Supper and all things that happened there? But, as a head football coach and having played for a head football coach, Jim and I both, we loved our coach, and he invited us to win, and he invited us to win with him, but he invited us to be ourselves. He put us in the place to play, to win. He knew where to put us. And he didn't know how we were going to do it. It was up to our will, to a burning desire to play for him. And
Wait, God
Huh?
knew what you were going to do, though. No, we really got to wrap.
God gave us free will, and he knew exactly what we were going to do, as Kevin said. But I'll tell you one thing, what God says to me, and
Go
what the
ahead.
head coach said to me was, stop thinking, Danny. Stop thinking.
I know. That's the Deacon Chuck School of Theology. So don't think. Okay. This is a big tent. We have a big group. And I mean, there's billions of us. We're not all formed the same way. We don't have the same background. We didn't play for Coach Wolf. We didn't have a lot of people don't have parents. Parents are terrible. However, so I always say, me. I always try to speak on behalf of those who don't accept this like everything like you and Deacon Chuck and say, okay, help me out. This is what they're saying. Help me out. Thank God for Jesus Christ. Okay. We're going to wrap it up right now. Danny, what's coming up? You're still wiping the sleep out of your eyes. You remember what's coming up?
Yep. Stay tuned, folks, for the Angelus and your prayer intentions with Peter and Jemmy.
Boom. WQPHradio.org. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your support. We appreciate however you can support the station, and you'll be hearing more about that in the coming weeks. Thank you, Deacon Chuck at
Thank
Mission Control.
God bless.
Jim, Kevin,
Yep.
thank you for joining us from so far away.
Glad to be here.
See you, Danny. God bless you, buddy.
God bless you, Tommy. God bless you all.
Hello, this is Peter and Jeremy. I'm the host of Your Prayer Intentions every Saturday at noon on WQPH 89.3 FM, and I want to talk specifically to you, the local businessman who is in our listening area. Now, we at WQPH is a Catholic radio station. We have an apostolate to bring the word of the church to our local community, to bring it comfort, to bring it prayer, and that's so important in these tough times. Now, this is something that we have to do. It's our apostolate. It's the thing that God has called us to do. Now, as a local businessman, you're also trying to reach the local community. You want your product or your service to be associated with something positive in that community. And I often say the right thing is the smart thing. And there is nothing smarter than to have your product or service associated with the greatest product of all time, the Word of God, the Word that comforts, the Word that protects, and the Word that brings people light in times of darkness. If you'd like to help us do that here by underwriting a show at WQPH, you can contact us at WQPH893@Comcast.net. That's WQPH893@Comcast.net. Again, WQPH893@Comcast.net. Make your great product or service be a part of something greater.
Thank you for listening to the 13th Apostle with Dan Duddy and Tom Caffrey. For more information on Dan, visit his website at www.danduddy.com or email dcduddy@gmail.com. Tom's website is faithpilgrims.com or email trcaffrey@faithpilgrims.com. How about you? Will you be the 13th Apostle?